everybody. I'm Frank Gruber, the co-CEO of Established, and I'm looking forward to my next conversation. I think you're going to really enjoy it because I think everyone here that's listening and watching today can learn something from it right now. So Meredith Fineman is an entrepreneur. She's a writer, a best-selling author, speaker, podcast host, and women's advocate. She's the founder of FinePoint, a leadership and professional development company that focuses on visibility and voice. And she's the author of Brag Better, Master the Art of Fearless Self-Promotion. It's right here. If you haven't seen it yet, it's out there on bookshelves. It's an Amazon bestseller, and it's been mentioned in the New York Times, Fast Company, and a lot of other places as well. Since we're here at the Start of the Year Summit, the conversation, this conversation particularly should help startups who are trying to get out there and tell their stories as they try to pitch their ideas to investors and really birth their ideas out into the world. So really excited to have Meredith here. Before we get started, I want to make sure that you're out there listening and you're part of the conversation. So if you're watching and want to join the conversation, you can tweet us basically by using the hashtag Startup of Year and Brag Better, and tell us how you're going to start bragging better today based on the info that you're learning right here. So join the conversation. We're going to be giving away some books to the best tweets, our favorite tweets out there, and one lucky person will get a signed copy as well. So that's what's happening. Welcome, Meredith. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, I'm sorry, but you don't Brag Better on the shelf behind you, but otherwise I'm excited to be here.
Oh, no, yeah. So I wanted to have it in my hand. I only have one copy. This is my precious copy. So
okay.
You got one too? I like to keep it handy, right here, so I can reference it immediately.
I can walk around with this. I just carry it everywhere. I have a little satchel. Yeah.
That's perfect. All right. So before we get started let's just dive right in, actually. So bragging in general, like it's probably, as we grow up, bragging has kind of had this negative connotation. People probably told you when you're younger, don't brag, it's blah, blah, blah. Can you tell us why we should start bragging and maybe brag better?
Yeah. So it's not a pretty word. The
Right.
problem is it's kind of the only one we have to describe the activities that I'm talking about, which is I define bragging as stating true facts about your work strategically and cohesively to advance your career. It's necessary to tell people what you do, especially in a time when we're all behind screens. I know of a lot of the people watching this, are in startups. You got to pitch yourself, your work. It's an essential part of work. And I thought I've been, speaking and training on bragging for the better part of a decade. And I thought of many people have told me not to use the word and it has a negative connotation. The problem is we just don't have a vocabulary to talk about professional accomplishment in a positive light. And that's too long for a title. So.
Right. No, that is a long title. I mean, I agree with it. I've always believed that and lived by the idea that no one's going to tell your story for you. So obviously I loved when you published this book recently, and it's an opportunity for people to learn how to better tell their story. So let's since we are at the Start of the Year Summit, I feel like we should kick things off with a little bit of a startup-ish kind of angle. What can startups learn from some of the folks that have been out there maybe bragging and maybe not doing it so well? So like Theranos and maybe more recently NS8. I mean, there is a backfire potentially of bragging too well and
yeah, so that's very extreme. So yeah. I'll back up for a second and say that the core messages of my book is that your accomplishments are worth talking about. I run my own business. It's hard. It's hard to always be touting yourself and your work. It's necessary for spreading a message. My background for this book and for my training and speaking is in public relations and this idea of packaging and pitching yourself, which is so necessary for startups, for visibility, for money, for, getting the right board members. It totally runs the gamut. But it's a hard, vulnerable thing to do. And, we're looking at these extreme examples. It's funny because people ask me, I define bragging as stating true facts about your work strategically and cohesively to advance your career, whether that's for an internship or a corporate board seat. And people hinge on the true facts part. We're in a really interesting time when it comes to sort of truth and meaning. And my audience is called the qualified quiet, people that have done the work but don't know how to talk about it. To some degree, that's all of us. You have to make noise to have a successful startup at any level. And so it's a necessary skill set that you can learn. Nobody's born with it. Yeah, I talk about Theranos and other like crime. That's a very, very extreme example, but it does underscore that we are rewarding the wrong voices, and we have this really intense inverse relationship between volume and merit. and we reward loud. And as much as I would like to be optimistic and say that we can get the loud people to be quiet, it's a matter of getting that qualified quiet to turn up the volume. And we all know someone in our industry, in our networks, in our classrooms, depending on where you are, who has done less than we have and gets more recognition. And I care that we really have those qualified, thoughtful voices speaking up. And this is how to go about doing it.
Right. So your advice then would be, don't get angry about the fact that these folks are loud, get louder, right? And do it yourself.
Yes. Yeah, so the pillars of bragging better are to be proud, loud, and strategic. Proud, is to be proud of your work, which I think is the hardest one. Loud does not mean the volume of your voice. I have been in and around media and public relations for over 10 years. What breaks through is repetition and consistency. So when I say loud, I mean the repetition of your message, your startup, your needs, your wants, your wins, and consistency of message all over online and then in person, when that can happen again. This is especially difficult right now when we're behind screens. And if you're someone who is like, I just got to get into the room and pitch them or 10 minutes with you, that can make it really, really super difficult. So that's important to keep in mind. And it's easy. We all get jealous or angry or whatever at someone who's like, well, I've done so much more than they have. Why are they on the panel? Why are they getting X and Y and Z? But hopefully not dwelling on that and figuring out a way to be loud in a way that feels okay to you is what matters. It's about what's true to you as well.
Okay. So let's talk about, maybe you're part of that group that's not out there being loud enough and not doing enough repetition. How do you come up with a strategy for bragging better?
So the first thing is, if a conference booker or a journalist, if you're really looking for outward recognition, can't figure out who you are, what you're about, and what you want or need, again, it's all circling around the idea of a good pitch. Whether that pitch is for media, whether that pitch is for money, whether that pitch is to hire, you use that in every facet of your life, which is where the skill set comes from, is PR, this idea of packaging and telling a good story and getting what you want out of it. And so a really great place to start, I tell everyone to ask 5 people with different vantage points to describe what you do. Maybe in this case, you ask 5 people with different vantage points what they think your startup does. And that can be a family member who loves you, but might not totally understand your work, and a friend who cares about you, but they don't want to talk about work all the time. And then a work acquaintance, someone you only know through social media, and then just pick a 5th vantage point. That's a really great place to figure out, okay, what's the current perception? What do people currently think I do? And if I take the average of those 5 points of view, is that how I'm currently wanting to describe myself and my work? That's a great place to start, as is things like consistent bios, consistent headshots. Make it really easy for someone to get the full download on you, especially because we're in an emergency situation. And you just need to hand people who you are and what you want on a silver platter.
Right. So you mentioned a couple tactics there that I think are really powerful, starting with the consistency. So consistency around your bio, that means on every social platform, try to get consistency.
Yes. So I obsessively talk about bios. I think that bios are just, some people, they're hard to do. It's hard to write about yourself. You can get someone to help you. You can get, my firm does it. Other people write professional bios. But the point is, it's an original bragging spot, which means that a lot of people's judgments around bragging, when you do talk positively about your work, particularly if you're a woman, or particularly if you're just, sorry, Frank, not a white guy, it is met with certain feelings, but people expect you to brag in a bio. That's where you put the kitchen sink, all your awards, all the accolades. That's where it goes. People expect to see that. So they're already primed to look for your accomplishments. So you need a long, a short, and a 2-line bio. Update them maybe once a quarter, put in the calendar reminder, keep a running Google Doc or whatever you use of your wins so you don't have to think back. And yes, those long, short, and 2-line, because here's the thing. If you give someone your long bio, you never want anyone to infer who you are. You have to hand it to them. So yes, it needs to be consistent across platform so that
people are lazy, right? I mean, at the end of the day, right? People are lazy inherently. They're not going to dig down and find what you've been doing. follow the links.
They're lazy, but also you never want, and you talked about the importance of telling your own story.
Right.
You never want someone to infer anything about who you are. Like, for example, if you don't have an up-to-date bio and I have 30 seconds to look at you, I might think you do something totally different from what you actually are currently doing.
Right.
And then you lost an opportunity.
Right. Is that fast? Yep, definitely. That's really interesting. So baseline, get that bio going. Maybe even you've got some other suggestions with like a website, personal website.
Yes, personal website. Again, you just want to, I like it because it's a one-stop shop of you. A lot of people are really stopped up because of the sort of technical aspects, which it's never been easier to use, varying website platforms. But you need to have, especially since we are in an economy where we all do so many different things. Right. I write, I speak, I podcast, I, have my business. And sometimes you need to lay it out for people. Again, you need to make it very easy for them. And it's also just a great place for you to look at everything you've done. But there are opportunities all around you to create this cohesive narrative about who you are. Something as small as your email signature, which you talk about all the time, should have links to correct things. And especially in the startup world, no matter what you're pitching for at whatever level, and whatever point in your career, you just want to show people who you are really quickly and get to a yes.
Right. And I think there's something there with words too. Words really matter. The way that you, like, for example, if you're out there trying to raise funding, the way that you put the context you use of how you're doing it, whether you're I'm raising funding or I've raised funding, like the way that you actually say it matters, right?
Yeah, your word choice definitely matters. So this idea of packaging and pitching yourself, as I said, is irrespective of level of seniority. And everyone has different sort of touch points that they want out of their brags, but particularly for fundraising. I mean, think about sitting on the other side of the table and just how many times these people are asked for money for varying concepts that people are willing to, die on a hill for. And so, picking your words carefully, practicing, but also understanding that, I did 20 amazing interviews with really interesting people for this book. One of them is Natalia Obertino-Guerra, who runs Pipeline Angels.
Right.
And she talks about how also pitching is not a zero-sum game. So for me, the word choice is important, but the sentiment behind it, the confidence behind it, the strategery, if you will, behind it, is actually what's most important, is sort of that third pillar, bragging better, strategic. It's like, well, what am I packaging this for? Am I making sure this is the right audience? This is what they want to hear. And is this going to lead to, in this case, funding?
Right. And there are some superpower words too, right? Do you want to share how you use those?
Yeah. So those are more about tone. So as a writer, I wanted to create a tactical, skill-based book on how to talk positively about yourself and professional accomplishment. And that tone varies depending on who you are. So superpower words mine are usually thoughtful, helpful, and funny. That's what I care about communicating. And I think all of the things that I do and say and post and tweet, do those reinforce the words that make me feel confident and powerful, but they're also a way to help figure out the tone of the way you communicate things and what you want to communicate, and how you want people to think of you.
That makes sense. All right. So I'm a big fan of gratitude, and I know that can be a big part of bragging better as well. How do you use gratitude to brag better?
Yeah, so I didn't include the word humble brag in the book, and people ask about it and have since it came out in June, kind of nonstop, because I do not believe that being humble and bragging are mutually exclusive. I'm using brag because it's basically the only word we have to describe this, set of activities. And that very limited vocabulary also showcases just how much we have to learn about how we can talk about ourselves in a way that feels good. But you can be grateful, thankful, honored, happy, and also be proud of the work you've done.
Right.
And I talk about the elements of a strong brag, which are pride, gratitude, showmanship, and presentation. And that gratitude piece, it's a great thing to espouse in general and feels good. And, all the science around how it makes you feel good and other people feel good. But, for example, when, posting, our exchange, for example, I'm grateful that you included me, and that's not a false feeling or pretense or anything. And that plays a huge part in helping people feel close to you when you share your work.
That makes sense. And I think the other piece there is, you see a lot of people out there saying, humble brag alert, or here comes my, self-promotion, kind of thing. You frown upon that, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's really hard and really scary to talk about yourself. It's an act of vulnerability. It's
right.
putting yourself out there, and that inherently is scary. If it were easy, everyone would do it. It's really easy to take shots at someone who's decided to put themselves out there, and people might have things to say. Usually you're just more afraid of what people have to say than what they ever end up saying. But,
right.
Also the internet can be a garbage fire. But those negative qualifiers, hate to brag, but self-promotion alert, shameless plug.
Right.
Those are showcasing your discomfort, and those translate to your audience or your reader. So I use an example of someone who I'm close to who does a lot of wonderful TV hits. She's super talented. She's super successful, but every single time she posts one, she puts shameless self-promotion alert. And self-promotion is hard. I wrote this book because it's hard, because it's scary. It elicits the exact same feelings. But then as the reader, I don't know what to do with it, because she posts this video and I'm like, well, do I share it? And then it makes your audience shut down. So I don't do anything with it. Whereas had she said, excited to share this, even if you're faking it till you make it, which sometimes we all are, and I look at her do a great job on TV and I think, oh, my friend is hosting this event and needs a moderator, that would be a great thing for you. And she does that and then gets, and so on and so forth. Visibility is about, rolling a snowball, and momentum versus sort of like sticking a hairdryer on it and melting it immediately. So if you can't, at least talk positively about your work, I hesitate in saying, like, if you can't be proud of it's hard, that's hard to do. And that takes work and time, but it's going to be very hard for anyone else to champion you as well.
Right. So don't put that in front of yourself when you're sharing things socially, because it'll basically exit out. People aren't going to want to attract. It's not going to attract more.
Yeah, you may as well not share it at all. It ends up just actually having a negative effect on your reader, because he or she doesn't know what to do with it, and then shut down, and then can't celebrate it. So there's honestly no point.
Right. No, that makes sense. All right. So let's talk about some things that maybe when's the right time to not brag?
So some of this is trial and error.
Right.
A lot of people come to me and my individual clients with FinePoint that I'm representing or training. It's the same fears. What if people think I'm obnoxious? What if people think I'm that guy, that girl? And what stops, it's almost physically impossible for you to brag too much if you're worried about those things, because the people that do, maybe a blowhard type person does not have that level of self-awareness. And that I think, it's akin to imposter syndrome. I think the people that are good, only people that are good at their jobs worry whether or not they're good at their jobs. But that level of self-awareness is a great tool that you just have to rely on, and feel intuitively that you will handle. However, sometimes you put your foot in your mouth. I've done it. And sometimes it's just not appropriate and you have to walk it back. Also, depending on, this is something that makes people uncomfortable and it's hard and it's scary, and tempering that, if those people are some of the gatekeepers to advancing your career, as much as I want you to tout your accomplishments, if they're going to be too uncomfortable to deal with it, then that's something to think about too. But some of it's just going to be trial and error. And a case of reading the proverbial room, since we're all, in online rooms.
Right. Now we're in the online room. And that's a great kind of transition to the next point. Making a first impression or an ongoing good impression in the real world when we were together meeting is, eye contact, handshakes, things of that nature. That's obviously great advice. What advice do you have, I guess, if we go back to that, but then also now that we're in this like virtual all the time Zoom world, how's that changed?
A bunch of Sims. So, so it's really hard. And publishing this book in a pandemic, which is a whole other conversation. And, I have a whole section on handshakes in the book. And as soon as it was too late and I didn't read it, what was happening. So I wrote an extra free chapter on how to brag better from home and online, which is on the Brag Better website at brag-better.com, which is going to be, I think, expanded upon. So it's hard. There are some advantages in this, some small silver linings. It's very scary, hard, difficult time. But you are at home. If you are someone who gets more nervous meeting new people, you're able to practice more. You're able to keep notes, up on your computer potentially where other people can't see them, and sort of playing to your strengths there. But yeah, the fourth pillar that I added of bragging better is explicit. People don't have time to infer. Nobody can infer things right now, first of all. There's no body language. You need to be careful with humor. It's very, very obviously literally two-dimensional. So you have to be careful, but you have to be very explicit because there is no subtlety right now.
Right. So maybe give an example of what you mean by that. So
if you are wanting to communicate your wins to your boss, you can't drop by your boss's office and like knock on the door and be like, hey, do you have 10 minutes? I just want to talk through, I thought I did that presentation went really well. Can I get some feedback? Saying something like, hey, I want to be sure I'm communicating my wins to you because we're not in the office and you can't see what I'm doing. What's the best way for me to do that? Is that a call? Is that a weekly rundown? Is that a different format that works for you? Because also they're you want to brag to people how they want to be bragged to. If your boss loves reports and you decide to get on a call and tell him or her your wins, that's not gonna register as well.
Right.
So thinking about those things, and again, this idea of a personal website, laying it all out there for people online, because it's the only option we have right now.
No, that makes sense. Great tips and advice. All right, so let's switch gears slightly. We've got a startup audience, a bunch of entrepreneurs out there watching. Can you share? They're going to be pitching here shortly. We got our top 100 companies that start the Year Summit here. Can you share some of the some pitching tips for anyone that's listening?
Yes. So pitching is hard. Pitching requires a lot of just throwing stuff against the wall. But I would say the best pitches, whether, in this case for funding, or for prizes or for attention, is considering your audience. And are you, getting the information as cohesively and strategically out there as possible. And what does this person want to hear? And how are you going to make it clear to them? Sort of reverse engineering it, if you will. I pitch my business and my writing and my work all the time. And it looks very different. So in this case, I'm talking to a bunch of entrepreneurs and I would tell you about, my company and the other entrepreneurs that I've coached or counseled, and whatnot, versus if I'm talking to a different type of potential client that's a leader in the, legal world, and say, okay, here's what I've done with lawyers. I understand the ins and outs of what you can and cannot say, and the sort of tightrope that you're walking there. But when it comes to pitching, it has to be relevant to whomever you are pitching. Don't forget to, and Fran Hauser, who's an investor, who's also in the book, and in the realm of Brag Better, I only represent people. Don't forget that you are part of the product too. And she talks about how she sees great pitches, but these founders, particularly women, but not only women, leave out why they're so wonderful. And so don't leave that out too, because also you're investing in an idea, but you're investing in a person. And so much of my work comes from what I saw as a millennial entrepreneur and this extreme cult of personality, and how, leadership is a driver of business for good or bad more than ever before, which we've had in American history, but it's so much more extreme now that don't leave yourself out of it. And there are lots of different kinds of leaders in the way that you want to be visible, but that's a huge part of it now for investors as well, is, what are you going to do as a leader, as a founder, as a COO, to help, get the company visibility and propel it forward.
That makes sense. All right. Now, part of that too is, you've done a lot of speaking in your career. Some of the founders here and other entrepreneurs and corporate folks that are here, investors, they all probably have had speaking gigs, but how do you feel about that as a way to get out there and brag better?
I mean, it's great. It's really saturated right now. I love doing speaking. I miss being on stages and I miss having stage fright, which is really weird because, I do it anyway and speak constantly.
Right.
It's a great way to get out there. I mean, it's the ultimate form of authority. Susan Cain, who I interviewed for the book, who wrote Quiet, is the reason why we talk about introversion. And she talked about how like she could write an article and people would think she was an authority, but she's on a stage for 5 minutes and people are like, oh, you are now the, it's something in humans' brains. Like it's one reason. And she also talked about her extreme stage fright, not stage fright, fear of public speaking, which is incredibly universal and normal. Right. Is it's just also an inherently unnatural human activity. If you were standing in front of a group of people alone outside of the pack, it usually meant they were going to attack you. But it's a wonderful thing if you can get involved in speaking. Even though it is saturated, it's never been easier to be on a virtual panel and to organize a virtual panel and to be a part of speaking things, because now there's no travel schedules. There's no, crisscrossing around the country or around the world. So it's a great way to build up your authority for sure.
So if you were out there trying to do that, how would you get more speaking gigs right now? Just any tips or tricks for anybody that's, got a company or wants to try to get in front of people?
Yeah. So, I'm undercutting my own business, and all of the rest of us that get paid to speak. But, first of all, nobody knows that you're available to speak unless you tell them. And a lot of my clients want to be speaking. And I say, okay, that's fine. But nowhere does it say that you have spoken, you're available to speak, someone can book you to speak. There are no photos of you on a stage holding a microphone.
So you don't speak. I mean, people would think you don't speak, right? Like that's
so much of it. Nobody knows what you've done, and nobody knows what you want until you tell them and ask them. And that's very true with speaking. Like they're like, oh, I want to speak more. I'm like, well, that's fine, but nowhere on your personal website or nowhere in your bio is there a nod to one speech. Like, well, I've only given a couple speeches, and I'm like, but yes, brag better. You've literally given them. Bragging is stating facts. You've done it, so state it. But also the order in which you state things really matters, because as humans, we absorb what you tell us first. So even if you are an entrepreneur and a writer, let's say, but you really want to be speaking more, and you say that you are an entrepreneur, writer, and speaker, people will think entrepreneur, you're telling people what you care about. But the order in which you say it. So if you switch it around and say, oh, I'm a speaker, writer, and entrepreneur, then they're like, oh, so you have to show up for yourself in that way and post those photos if you have them, post the video if you have them. Video really, really matters. Conference bookers want to know what you look like, what you sound like, what your setup looks like. Do you have a ring light now is a thing, so you just have to say you're available to talk, and you have to ask all the time. And even if sometimes you see someone who is on a panel and you get jealous, but a better response is to reach out to that person and say, hey, like if there's ever a speaking gig that you're unable to do or is not, on your pay structure, like it's not your fees, I'd be so grateful for you to pass it to me. I always want to pass great speaking gigs to people. That's, highlight something that we got too long into the conversation for me to say, which is that bragging better is a team sport, and it's part of your job to pass the mic and share the mic and lift up other voices. And if you're someone we listen to and in a position of privilege, it is part of your job to do so. Yep. A lot of these conference bookers won't do the work. So, if someone, a woman, a person of color, who would, make a really great speaker, suggest them and champion them too. It's free for you.
That was going to be my next question is, what can I do as a white man to help other women and minorities? So basically go out there, champion what they're doing, share what they're doing on social media and other things.
But also every time you get asked to speak, is there gender equity on the panel? Or is it diverse? If not, make some suggestions. It's free. A lot of people be committed to, say, I really want to do this panel, but I noticed that there are no Black people on it. And, I want to make sure that you're being inclusive. Or again, there you get asked, I'm sure, to do a lot of stuff. If you can't do it, make a concerted effort that you suggest a list of people who aren't white dudes. And that is a great service.
Right. And we take that very seriously, with all of our events. We've done hundreds of events throughout the last decade, and it's something we pay close attention to. So I'm glad that you're putting it out there and helping other people realize that that's something that needs to be done as well.
And it's never case of, people ask me, so the qualified quiet is irrespective of gender. A lot of my work is around women and bragging, but a lot of people are like, oh, do you want men to shut up? And it's no, you are the default voices we listen to. We need you to help champion us. It only makes you look better, and it's free for you to do. So there's really no excuse. And it's good to just keep it top of mind. It's a tremendous service and an important one. And it doesn't minimize your accomplishments or take away the opportunities that will come to you either. There is room on the stage, literal or figurative, for everyone.
Right. And I think you're 100% right. I loved your book. It's a great roadmap for anyone looking out there to raise their profile. You got your copy. I'll keep mine here. We're going to be, for anyone that's following the conversation on Twitter, again, use those hashtags startup of year and brag better. And there'll be some free copies sent to some people with our favorite tweets. There'll be one signed copy as well. Maybe share, like, how are you going to brag better, based on this conversation, and we'll take a look at those. And Meredith, where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Please consider buying Brag Better or requesting it from your local library. Go to brag-better.com. It has a list of independent bookstores, independent Black-owned bookstores you can order from, or, the big guy. I did the audiobook. I recorded it in a closet in quarantine. You can listen to me talk it at you for 7 hours. Get on your Kindle, etc. I'm meredithfineman.com, at Meredith Fineman, mostly on Instagram is my favorite platform. And I'm around.
All right. Thank you so much, Meredith. Really appreciate it. Stay well. Thank you for joining us. And obviously, we really appreciate you sharing the importance of bragging better.